I am Joshua Kemble, and this is my vlog where I talk about my art, creating comic books, and I am a graphic novelist or a cartoonist who does graphic novels. My first graphic novel is 2 stories, book 1, which is a comic that deals with questions of faith and mental illness, while also talking about childhood playground politics, hero worship. Like when I was a kid, I was really obsessed with Indiana Jones and Back to the Future, and used to try to recreate them in like playground games. And it also deals with heavy mental illness issues like severe depression and panic disorder, and kind of juxtaposes what mental illness is like, what depression is like for adults, with what it's like for kids. And yeah, so that's a little bit about that book. You can pick it up at Amazon, 2 stories, at a really reduced rate. If you want to actually be a good citizen and support your local comic book shop, you can just ask that they order and carry 2 stories, book 1, well, 2 stories by Joshua Kemble, and that's what it will be listed as under Ingram. So if they're like, hey, how do I order this? You say, hey, go to Ingram, you can order the book there. And that's a good way to support your local comic book shop. But if you're short on cash, then definitely, again, just, you can get it on Amazon at a really premium and low and cheap rate. All right, so I am an art director as well, and so that's where I'm always heading on these commutes. And this is my Vloggins, where I just talk about art, life, and all sorts of fun stuff. But mainly, like, just my thoughts on my process of working on 2 stories, book 2. And yeah, so yesterday, I mentioned in my vlog that we're getting our floor demoed. So my family's staying with family, and that basically it's just been really stressful because my wife also had injured her back, and so juggling all of us like cramped into a little house, and that's not our house, and then having our house and dealing with the contractors, and yeah, just a lot of stuff was like really hard to juggle. Well, I can tell you, like, today the floor was demoed, so it's like they had to completely remove the old flooring, and now it's just like this. You see that solid foundation underneath the concrete, and then after, we'll see where it goes. But that is a little bit about that. So yeah, so today they should be starting to install, and I'm not sure what exact process they'll do, but I'll probably find out after work when I go check it out. So yeah, and then an update on my wife. She's feeling a little bit better, and able to be a little bit more mobile, which is awesome. So still has to use a little walker to kind of get around right now, but seems like she's on the mend, and that's really exciting. So yeah, that's kind of all the stuff I was juggling and dealing with and stuff. Yesterday I probably got home and settled around like 7:30 or 8. And yeah, so yeah, I was pretty exhausted, but I did manage to pencil 1 panel. I know, like, for myself, like, penciling 1 panel is not going to be enough for book 2 to get completed. But I do think it's important, especially when you're working on comics, to like keep a daily habit, and I've talked about that a lot, where it's like, as a writer or an artist, if you want to do personal work, especially the big projects that aren't necessarily financially viable initially, but they require a large time investment, then you got to get in the habit of repeating, working on a daily basis. And here's my suggestion. And Kevin Cross had like a challenge called the 100 Days of Making Comics Challenge, where for 100 days, every day, try to work on your comic for like 30 minutes a day. And then once you get to 100, you've completed a season of the hundreds. And it was a cool way to get people to build artistic habits of working on their comics daily, that my friend Kevin Cross started. And but I have a new suggestion, and this isn't like a new hundreds or anything. I think the hundreds is very helpful, and I still recommend people do it. What my recommendation is more in the sense of repeating the process of doing comics daily until you get to a point where you feel really off and weird if you haven't worked on it for a day, where you're like yearning to work on it. And it's not going to work like that every day. Like, you know, you're going to have days where you just absolutely do not feel it. But in general, I think if you repeat things, you know, 2 or 3 months daily, you start building habits and routines. And the second you have a habit, it's almost like trying to kick a drug. And that, at least that for me, has been the thing that has helped me. I'm not saying do your art to an unhealthy extent or anything like that. I'm just saying, like, just do it daily until you can't not do it. Meaning, till you get to a day where it's very hard to imagine not working on comics. And then when you have a day off, like, if you start noticing that feeling going away, like where you're like, I kind of don't miss working on comics, then that's a good indicator. Like, dude, you need to hit your comics. You get in the gym, do some reps. Your reps being cartooning. But anyhow, so I penciled the panel last night. I am still super exhausted, but I was thinking about hopefully trying to field a conversation about paneling while I'm driving. So hopefully that first bit didn't deter you from this last chunk. If I were a YouTube guru, I would probably go through these conversations and like kind of highlight that clip, like the clip where I get to the topic, put that at the beginning. But since I kind of do these stream of consciousness and I am very limited on time, I'm going to try doing just daily vlogs with this same kind of technique, because it's just doable. It doesn't cut into my comic making time. And at a time like this week, I don't think I'm going to be able to make much YouTube content that needs to be like heavily edited. So, paneling to me is one of the coolest things about comics, one of the most powerful things about comics. And I think there are ways that I think about paneling that help me have better paneling. And they're very similar to the approach to illustration. In illustration, quite often, a lot of younger students or like early illustrators will just draw a character like straight on or with a side view. That's a straight on side view. They'll use like a wash of color or something for the background, and that's it. And I've done that. It's fun to draw characters, and it's fun to draw people, and it's fun to draw them with minimalist backgrounds, and it's quick. So, and I have panels like that too. But when you're in illustration, one of the things you have, at least when I went to school for illustration, one of the things, and I went to Cal State Long Beach. That's where I got my BFA and my MFA. So BFA in illustration, MFA in fine art illustration. So Master of Fine Arts and Fine Art. I guess it's MFA with a focus on like studio art. That's illustration. I never quite understand it, but regardless, it's illustration. When I was going, the thing that they really focused on training us how to do was to take the thing that's obvious, like the first solution that you have, because and you learn this too, that art and illustration are problem solving. You have a problem, which is whatever the assignment is. Let's say it's a newspaper editorial. Your problem is I have to visually express the feeling of this article. How do I do that, right? If you're doing logo branding for a client, it's like I have to come up with a logo that is the antithesis, like that ends up being the exact extent of a company's identity. So what is their identity, and how do I do that, right? It's a problem, needs a solution. You as a visual problem solver are going to come along and solve that. Anyhow, so what I'm getting at is quite often one of the biggest learning curves, other than just the foundations. The foundations are just like drawing, composition, rendering, 2D design, which is composition, those kind of things, life drawing, and you need those foundations in like, I think most art forms. I think you actually even would benefit, if you're a graphic design major, I think you'd still benefit from some life drawing classes and putting your design and composition into practice there too. But anyhow, so half of the challenge is beyond that, those basics. It's learning how to think beyond the first solution. And a lot of design classes I had too were like that too, where you often will have an idea and it's quite often not the best idea. And so your first crack at it is rarely going to be your best, which is why, they usually in art school and at, bigger design firms, they have you iterate ideas, come up with multiple roughs, review the roughs, go through a process of perfecting and refining it, sometimes combining ideas from two roughs into one final thing. Anyhow, so all of that being said, with composition, like composing or iterating an idea, often your first idea is the worst. Sometimes, rarely, your first idea is the best, but by iterating, by going through different solutions to your problem, you often come up with better, more subtle, or more effective emotional solutions to what you're trying to visually convey. So anyhow, how does this tie back into paneling? Let me use an example first before we get into paneling. That would just apply to illustration and broadly. So let's say I'm showing a car chase. There's an article about people speeding on the freeway and how it's a problem. I'm only saying that because I'm driving on the freeway. It comes to mind. So people are racing each other on the freeway. That's your idea for your illustration. So initially, you're going to just show the cars. You're going to be very literal. You're going to probably show it from a pretty standard angle. Maybe you just show it from the side because you have the cars there. Or maybe your second iteration's like, I'm gonna kind of get in front of the car so it gives like a dynamic movement, like a diagonal line, visual line of the car coming toward the camera. So it's more dynamic. But you're still, again, like doing this article showing cars speeding. You go through iteration after iteration after iteration until you realize a better framing of it, which is maybe the illustration itself is the rear view mirror of your car, and the driver, the reflection of the first driver in the race. It's two drivers just sweating and looking really stressed out. You see like kind of that section of their face, like the eyes and some sweat beads on their brow, but they look really determined, like they're making this really determined expression. And then in the background behind it, you see the car that's pacing it, and maybe like some speed lines, just to show that car is just zooming, like you are zooming. So there's another way to frame it, and maybe that ends up being the better solution, and you go with that. So does that make sense? Like, it's not super complicated, but it's just like, don't go with your first idea. Don't always go with the literal. Try to think of other ways to frame things. Another way to frame it would be like, maybe it's to the left of the driver's hand on the steering wheel, and they're literally gripping the steering wheel so hard that it's causing the steering wheel to kind of shred a little bit. And from that view, maybe you just see like the lower part of a jaw, like they're kind of looking forward, and the viewer is like gritting their teeth, like, right? I mean, not the viewer, the driver is gritting their teeth, like, and they have, that side view. It's on the left side of the person, the driver, and so that you see their chin with that expression, and you see their hand gripping the wheel, and then framed between their chin and hand, you see the window, and through the window, you see another car speeding by, and maybe just to make it a little fun, like maybe that driver's like giving you the finger, they're giving the main figure in the foreground the finger, or they're like, and they're speeding. I mean, you can see it because like maybe the back wheels or the front wheels aren't even touching the ground. Like the car's going so fast that the wheels aren't even touching the ground. Something like that. Again, like that would be a way to do a side view that's like a more standard view, and then give it a little more dynamic nature. I'm just going through this process to show you how you can iterate ideas that aren't specifically literal, and the more you do it, the more you can come up with pretty compelling compositions. So then let's say that composition's kind of boring. You can also think about framing. Like I could be like, I'm going to tilt this so it has a diagonal angle to give it like more visual movement. Maybe the camera is tilted so that it's lower on the left, kind of like this camera, which the only reason this is tilted is because my phone holder thing is obnoxious and broken. But then you tilt it, and then you create this real dynamic motion. Like there's movement, like your eye is moving the way of the car, so there's a non-literal feeling of movement. The expressions are reading the emotion of the movement. There's a little more subtext to it. Like maybe even for subtext, there could be, I don't know, racing gear in the car, or maybe they could have like a coffee mug that is like spilling coffee, but it's like zooming back, so you wouldn't have to use zip lines. You could literally show the dynamic movement just through the objects in the car. maybe one of the maybe the driver in the foreground has a hula girl that's just like tilted really far, like you can tell just the force of gravity is pushing that hula girl back, and like maybe her skirt is blowing too, so that like again you just know this is dynamic race and movement. And then of course you see all the freeway markings, and maybe there's a cop in the background, maybe you introduce new staging. My point is that is one verbal exercise on like an idea for an editorial illustration. And quite often in editorial illustration, that's half the game. It's like, how do I do something that's less obvious, that's less expected, and will put this in a different context with voice that's unique to me and to this article. Another thing is, you can throw in commentary, like especially in an editorial, so that you can take the text and give it even more layers of meaning. So let's say that article again was about the problems of this. Maybe put some danger into the situation that shows that these two grazing drivers are not being safe. Is there a kid near the freeway that they're zooming toward? Is there like some kind of threat or danger? Is there trash coming out of their cars as they're going really fast and it's littering? Are they just zooming forward and you see like just the back of like a dead still car? My point is just to bring up this iteration process. So how that applies to paneling and the element of paneling that I was hoping to talk about on this video, and I'm doing it in a much more long-winded way than I think I would need. But anyhow, the point is, when you're coming up with panel sequences and you're breaking down your plot into panels, and each panel is representing a story beat, like a moment in the story. And not only is it its job to represent a moment in the story, it's to reflect the timing of that moment. So you want to think about size of paneling in relation to timing, like how long is the viewer going to be looking at this. You can incorporate page turn into that panel, so you can think, if this is the last panel on my right page, then I might want to think about something happening that makes the reader want to turn the page at that point. And this applies to like slice of life comics, that kind of thing. So if you have a big reveal, again, maybe you want that big reveal to be when you flip the page, or the big reveal's hidden. Anyhow, so you start figuring that out. You know what you want to kind of say in your panel at that point. Now start thinking, do I need to show this literally? Is there an intention behind just showing what you're saying? Or, can you think of framing it in a different way? Like if we're having a conversation scene, and I'm a guy who I'm an ex-smoker, and I occasionally vape to get nicotine. So if I'm a character in a story, maybe my hands are fidgeting when I'm talking because I'm nicking out, like I'm having withdrawal because the conversation's gone too long. Then maybe we show my hand during part of the conversation sequence, being a little awkward. Maybe we show what I'm looking at instead of showing me talking to somebody else. Let's say it's at a Starbucks. Okay, that's our scenario. That's going to be our scenario for this paneling exercise. So the character walks into a Starbucks to order coffee. You could show the very literal, very first solution way of showing that, which is acceptable, right? But that's just half of the battle, and you're missing out on all the communication you can give. One, like, what's your character feeling? Is your character excited because they just released pumpkin spice lattes at Starbucks? So if that's the case, then maybe, instead of just showing a beat for beat action sequence, you show some other indicators that they're happy. Even the staging and the way you make that character act. Maybe you need more panels, so you have your character enter a Starbucks, show what they're looking at, and anytime you show the character kind of look off screen in a direction, and then in the next panel show what's in that direction, people make the connection usually, hey, that's what this guy is seeing. And so maybe he sees all the fall Starbucks stuff, And then maybe the third is like a zoomed in shot of like pumpkin spice stuff. And then the fourth panel would be like a shot of his expression. Like that's where you maybe get an uptight shot, like just a smile. But instead of like a straight on shot, maybe you're just showing their mouth. Like just, yeah, that's, smiling. And then maybe the barista is really annoyed and tired because it's morning and they deal with pumpkin spice all day. So then maybe show the barista and their point of view. But as the barista is having this uncomfortable exchange, you have an optimist and a pessimist that are having an uncomfortable exchange. What are things you could show other than that exchange that highlight and indicate how uncomfortable it is? So, put into practice, this would be like, I'll explain this from a project I can't talk about. I can't mention what the project is. But I will tell you, in the project that can't be named, that's supposed to be released this year, there is a sequence where I have two characters talking to each other at a restaurant. And they're kind of hitting it off. And I actually, through a whole section of the conversation, show one of the characters playing with the rim of their glass as they're talking. Now, I don't even show the characters. I just show the overhead view of their hand and kind of what it's doing with the glass during the conversation. So it shows the character's responses just through their hand movements. Like, oh, I'm shocked. The hand goes off the glass. Ah, interesting. As the conversation gets more interesting, they start kind of rounding the edge of the glass. People do awkward things during conversations, and there's so many ways that you can frame things in non-literal ways. Or if they are literal ways, at least from an interesting point of view that isn't the first solution. This isn't to say first solutions are always bad, and quite often showing the very literal action is a good way to go. But I'm just saying, when you're coming up with panels and your compositions for your panels and your story choices for your panels, the size of the panel, what you're framing in the panel, going beyond just the first solution can really increase the emotional impact of your story. Unconventional paneling is not a bad thing to consider either. And if you're starting out, obviously, I would recommend maybe stick to conventional paneling at first. But every once in a while, break out of the box. Do you need a box? Do you need the same panel sizes? Do you need every page to be a spread? Do you need every page to be panel lists? These are things just worth considering, and it's just something I've been thinking about this morning. But the one thing I was going to just start with, paneling is something I could talk about forever. I've been kind of rambling a little bit around it. But in general, the one thing I was thinking about personally today was just remembering and thinking about one of the tools of the trade with paneling that could be useful to people. And I think that's one of them. So the next time you're working on a comic or illustration or painting, before you're just going to do that money shot, that big pin-up poster of a character where you get a really good drawing of a character from a really boring point of view, and it's just a straight-on shot. either in front or to the side of them. And, you know, again, like, maybe it's a little bit of an angle to it. I'd just say reapproach it. Like, give it a shot. When you're thumbnailing, when you're sketching out your panel sequences, try thinking, do I need to show the people in this conversation? Are they having a conversation outside? If they are, should I show some of the objects around them? Like a director would in a movie, right? Like, one thing a good director will do, let's say it's an old Western movie, and they're trying to show like the tension of a town, and it's, I don't know, there's going to be a gunfight, and it's that classic exchange where you have the good gunfighter, or maybe just the, you know, anti-hero gunfighter come into the horribly oppressed village to meet the kind of bandit that's running the village and challenge them to do a duel. And it's like this very tense scene. Part of what makes it tense is like, maybe they show this village has limited water, and maybe they show what kind of animals would be in that scenario. Maybe there's a dog in the corner that's like cowering away from the guy to create like, oh, that's the villain. Maybe you show the barren wasteland. Maybe you show just behind the boots of the character when they're talking, rather than just like a dead-on shot of all the action, literally, right? We see this all the time. I think a lot of us know and are trained to employ that, but it's just another example of like, think outside and beyond just the first solution. It's not always going to be the best. Sometimes the first solution and the very literal approach is very literally what's necessary. But, and here's the big part that'll wrap this whole conversation, hopefully, if you're even still with me 30 minutes into it. The one thing to kind of keep in mind at the end of that whole, like, thinking beyond the first solution is that even if you end up going with the first solution, you're going to have so much more commitment to it. Because you'll know, and you'll have thought about intention, and you'll have thought about what you want to communicate and why it is the way it is. And that's cool, because then you can defend it. And not only can you defend it to yourself, but if you're working commercially, you can defend it to the client. Like, you can say, these were the reasons that I chose to do this in a standard way. I tried these different iterations. These didn't work because of this. This worked because of this. And then also, don't be defensive if somebody's saying, hey, did you try a different angle? Have you tried something less literal? Now, because of that, also, I don't, it's not like I'm going around on the internet and saying, hey, this is too dead on, this is too literal, and you need to do a better job, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to do that. Because that's just, you know, honestly, unless somebody's asking for a critique, I'm generally not going to provide it unless it's a really good friend. But I was going to say, just when you're creating your environments and stuff like that, a good tool to have for your paneling initially is just that instinct to second guess your first choice. And not second guess it to not commit to any choice, but just going, is there a better way I could show this? Is there a different angle I could show this? Is there a different character I could show during this character talking? And obviously clarity is going to be key. So if this is so subtle that no one on earth would be able to understand what you intend through your art other than you, then you've lost the plot, right? Like, you've lost the plot of the story. And at that point, you're just kind of drawing pretty pictures. So clarity is key too. But think through it, and I don't know. For me, I find that to be a really useful tool. And again, I also also want to give the caveat, this is just stuff that's helped me in my art career. It is not something you have to do. And this is an approach that I think about. I'm curious to know what you guys think about. How do you guys avoid the first solution conundrum? I will say commercially, sometimes you just don't have time and you have to go with whatever your first idea is. That's the idea. It just depends. But something to consider. I hope all of you guys are having a good day, and I'm gonna get to work, and hopefully we'll have a good work day too. And I hope you guys have a good creative time. If you haven't yet, hit subscribe, hit the bell, hit the like button. Let me know in the comments section if you're liking these vlogs and you want me to keep going. I know they're a little disorganized because a lot of this is just thoughts coming from my head, like in the morning, regarding comics. But I think this was a pretty fun one. All right. Yeah, I guess that'll do it, and I will see you guys tomorrow. Bye.